For my major work, I designed a portable life-saving kind of system that people can use on their wrists at the beach, and it's essentially like a GPS but for underwater use, and it helps find people who are in need or struggling to swim. There are a few main challenges in the project, especially because as the project, it was a prototype. It wasn't a finished design. No one had kind of done this thing before. And so it was all about innovating and coming up with new ways to solve problems. One of those problems was my inexperience with electrical engineering, which led to a few kind of major failures that meant that the two systems didn't work together properly. But apart from that, yeah, it was a bit of a bumpy ride, but I think it turned out well. The design process is really unique because it gives you kind of this opportunity to see the entire project from start to finish, and you're constantly evaluating throughout the process. So when you start coming up with the idea and you start sketching and drawing things, you can kind of see those drawings come to life in computer models, and then in prototypes, and then in kind of final kind of finished models, and you can see the entire evolution of the design throughout the process. Yeah.
I painted with watercolour paints and screen printed a concertina book that shows the colours involved in a bushfire and its effect on nature. When our country was in a time of hectic bushfires earlier in the year, we used to go driving through those areas, and I became really interested in like all the different colours that were like left over from a bushfire, and I thought like even though there's been like so much destruction, it's like a really beautiful landscape even though it's all been burnt, and I really was fascinated by that, and so I wanted to do something with that. It is quite a large scale painting, like it's I think almost 3 meters long, and it's quite a pain to paint, like watercolour paint something that large, because it takes a very, very long time, and so I think I had a bit of trouble managing my time in order to finish that properly and in a way that I wanted it to be finished. I do really enjoy watercolour painting. I find it really fun, really therapeutic, so it wasn't like I was like working really hard on my major work. It was a lot of fun. Yeah, it was very relaxing, and I got to do it with my friends who were also painting, so that was a lot of fun too.
I did a series of landscape oil paintings, and in those oil paintings I tried to capture my feeling of nostalgia. Nostalgia, or something similar to that feeling, is a feeling that I seem to often have, a longing for, you could say, better times almost. There's a surreal feeling to it, and that was something that I reflect upon quite often. The people, the places and the stories, and something about that feeling almost has a melancholy touch to it, but also a sense of happiness as well that it did happen. But the reason I feel a bit of sadness is because those times have passed. You can't really quite feel that moment again in the same way. Yeah, that's what I try to capture in these paintings behind me.
What inspired my major work is like my personal experience of how life is like a collage of different experiences and emotions and feelings and motivations that makes each person unique. And so for mine, I've constructed and painted the panels where I've integrated like my favorite things, like everything from the favorite video games that I've played to like writing, my favorite colors, my favorite shapes, that kind of come together in like a certain flow and a certain direction. That symbolizes the way that I like to slow down and appreciate the things that we take for granted in life, like the little really tiny details in nature and in life that we kind of forget about. So yeah, that's kind of inspired the way like it flows and kind of like the tumble and jigsaw of it.
I have always liked drawing and painting like faces, so that's kind of why I chose to do portraiture. And then I don't actually paint plants and birds that much, but it was cool getting to do that a bit more. The paintings of my grandparents, my grandma on my mum's side and my grandpa on my dad's side, and the animals and plants around them kind of represent the different countries that they've lived in.
I had a concussion in year 10, so I decided to do a reduction lino on the 3 memories that I remember on the day, because I lost 45 minutes of memory to amnesia. So these are my 3, this is a series of my vague memories of the day. It's very satisfying seeing each layer come together.
Learning spray paint art was a long and difficult process, as I'd never done it before. And I found a lot of challenges when it came to making stencils, because making them out of certain materials would often make them fall apart and stick to the surface I was spraying on. So I decided to make them out of plastic, but often the plastic stencils would blow up, so I had to use weights to keep them down on the edges. This, however, didn't always work, and as a result, I often had to go back and fix what I had already done because it sprayed underneath the edge of the stencil.
I wanted to do a curved painting so that you could kind of get immersed into the forest, because when you go into the forest it feels as if you're standing in the middle of everything and it just keeps going and going and going, and it just worked with the shape to paint a landscape like that so that you could feel as if you're standing in it and it just keeps turning around you. It's 2.1 meters long and it's curved, so it's even longer. It's also really tall. It's just a massive artwork. It was a huge task to paint the entire thing. Oil painting, I've only oil painted twice as well, so it was a new skill that I had to get better at. And progressively it did get better, but it was tricky to kind of learn it at the start and do it well. My family loves camping. We're always outside and we just love the forest, the bush. It's great, so I wanted to paint that. It's mainly based off of the Wadigans National State Forest. We always go camping, 4-wheel driving there. It's just off of there. I like that I got quite a bit of detail into the whole thing. Everywhere you look, there's something, I know, new when you look at it again. It's very interesting to look at.
For my major work, I chose to redesign the wall-mounted first aid kit. So the current designs of the wall-mounted first aid kit are not time efficient, they're hard to access, and it's really challenging to locate the needed item. And it's really important when in specialty classrooms there's a lot of potential dangers, so it's important for those first aid kits to be accessible, for the items to be easy to locate, and for it to be time efficient so that the safety of the students is to the standard that it should be. I know it was challenging to incorporate some of the design and features that I wanted, so some of them were trickier to do than I thought they would be. I learnt a lot of Fusion 360 skills, which I hadn't really done that much of before, so that was challenging, but it was good to learn that.
It's centered around the idea of creating kind of an architectural representation of different states of mind. So there are 4 of them, which are the 4 sculptures. There's detached, daydreaming, inquisitive, and faith. So they're all made out of wood, and I spray painted them so I could get like a really vibrant color, because I like street art and that sort of style. I like the inquisitive one because it's got like some nice spray paint gradients.
I chose Jonah firstly because it's one of my favourite Bible stories. I just think it's so wacky and fun. And I also thought that would be really fun to interpret in my own way. And I also really like the ocean, so I thought that would be a nice way to intertwine that with my art major work. I wanted Jonah to look a little bit distressed, a little bit tired, because he's like that throughout the whole story. And I thought that lino printing would be able to embody that, because you can get really good fine lines and stuff when cutting. I thought the feet would be a good, like, not as obvious way to show Jonah running away from his calling, so I thought that the feet would be a nice asset. I like the colour palette that I chose. I think that it's very earthy, like takes a realistic side to the story.
Well, coming into visual arts in year 12, I had a pretty clear idea that I wanted to use photography as my major work. The overall experience was pretty good for me. Most of it is urban photography, and I utilised a low shutter speed to get that out of focus effect. The poetry was based around emotion and men's incapacity to express that emotion. The scratches in the poems and the photos represent that frantic experience of someone not being able to express their emotions, especially as a man. I think I just like how it all came together in the end. You know, all of its working parts and all of its moving parts coming together as one, really.
So my first inspiration for the beginning was the movie Parasite, which was released, I think, last year. And that just like, one of the scenes were really nice where they had multiple houses going down. So I tried to copy that, but like there was a size regulation, so I had to kind of shrink it a bit. Yeah. And I just kept on building on that idea and I've come here. So one of my inspirations / media was COVID-19, and I kind of reflected on it, and I've just tried to demonstrate how social distancing can help. Well, if you don't, you get infected. So I used the media sculpture to show COVID-19. My clay bats had the greatest challenge, where I had a really good bat in the beginning, and then I tried to make something similar and they started getting bigger and bigger, and I realized it was way too big, so I kind of stopped from there.
I did a coffee table, making the actual table itself and making the soccer aspect of it, because I like soccer, it's just like the table can show you, and basically why I wanted to make the table, because I wouldn't mind a coffee table at my own house that I actually made. Not like someone that made it at IKEA, for example. So I wanted to make it an authentic, but it's like an emotional type thing. And I'm gonna like put it in my room, I guess. There was one part that I liked in particular, like putting as you can tell, my major work, coffee table type, it was putting the soccer mat on. And because I like soccer, as the previous question, I just wanted to show people that I actually like soccer and the sport.
So for my major project for Society and Culture, the PIP, I looked into the morality and sustainability of animal agriculture. My intention with the project was to go in and pretty much disprove a lot of the claims from a lot of like environmental activists or animal rights activists and stuff like that. Yet the opposite actually happened. It actually ended up making me change a lot of my opinions about the subject, so yeah. I just often thought there was no real correlation between like a lot of like environmental problems with the animal agriculture industry, as well as the fact that the sort of practices which happen in the industry are not actually as bad as people make it out to be. But through my research, I learned a lot about the real impacts that it has on not only the like animals within it and stuff like that, but also on communities who are very negatively affected and just people who are disadvantaged due to the impact it has on them. I've paid a lot more attention to like, just because I went in with such a different view and then had such a big change, I'm now way more open to listening to more people sort of thing. Like I often had a lot more affirmed like thoughts on things, but this has taught me to take a step back and listen more. It's really changed the way I do it. Like I no longer sort of eat meat or anything. I don't like have like animal sort of based products. So I just it's really changed the way I've sort of acted in my own life and stuff like that.
Well, my project was like, it's a desk that kind of like goes over your bed. So it's for like small space living. And I just figured that like there's no room in my house for a desk for me to study on. And I think that's a relevant problem for a lot of people today. So I thought it would be a good innovative design to make for my major work. The joints were very, very difficult to make because like when you manufacture something, you mold it, but when you're like designing something from a few scrap materials, you don't have that option. And also the coronavirus was like, oh yeah, it's bad. Being able to design something that I thought was like different and unique, and it wasn't very like mainstream almost. Yeah, that's what I enjoyed.
I created a large dining room table to fill a gap in our house that I thought was the best option. My favourite part's probably the walnut trim that I put on it. That was to match another table we have in our house that's kind of similar. There are a lot of problems. I don't think I had one lesson where everything went right. Pretty much everything went wrong from the legs to the braces to the tabletop. It was very long. I definitely enjoy the creating process a lot more, even though it was a lot of like things going wrong. Yeah, I found that much more enjoyable. I just like creating stuff and making. I want to become a carpenter, go into the building industry. I just love doing the hands-on things.
I chose to look at the microplastics and the gastrointestinal tracts of yellowtail scads. Yeah, I felt like microplastics are a new and upcoming challenge for our generation, with lots of microplastics invading our oceans. And this is pretty much to look at how microplastics damage our waterways and how they damage the fishes in the ocean. The most difficult process was probably sorting out the microplastics. They would often, camouflage into the organic matter. The dissection of the fish was also hard, as it was really slimy and it just wasn't my favorite part of it. The results were very, very, very fulfilling to find microplastics and to report that to the scientific project. It really showed how microplastics are damaging our waterways, and it shows how microplastics have invaded it.
I made an L-shaped desk with curved legs, and then it has a shelf with a hidden magnet in it. I chose to make a desk because the one I had in my room originally was actually from Cambricky, and I wanted to make a new one that actually fitted my room and that one that I could use throughout my years and take it with me wherever I went. Making my legs was definitely a learning curve for me. I had to learn how to laminate, how to steam bend, and I had to learn how to make jigs that would actually fit and work with my design. I enjoyed the process overall. Learning new things and learning new skills was fun for me. I always love woodworking, and it's just fun to learn new things.
For my major work, I did a bioinformatic, genomic and protein mechanical analysis of the spike glycoproteins on the SARS-CoV-1 and SARS-CoV-2 viruses. So these are the two viruses that are responsible from the SARS epidemic and the COVID-19 pandemic. And so it was getting the epidemiological data and attempting to understand why there are differences by looking at the access point that the virus used, the spike glycoprotein, which are the little spikes that are along the viral envelope of the virus itself. Looking at the molecular differences in those to try and figure out why SARS-CoV-2 is more infectious than SARS-CoV-1. My findings, they found that that SARS-CoV-2 is a more infectious virus than SARS-CoV-1. There are a plethora of variables that you can look at when it comes to trying to analyze the infectivity of a particular virus. But the one that I focused on was a binding affinity for a part of the spike glycoprotein called the receptor binding domain. There's a ridge at the receptor binding domain in which it interlocks with the protein of a human cell called the ACE2 protein. And so as that ridge interlocks with the N-terminus of the ACE2 protein, I found that there was a substantially higher binding affinity with the SARS-CoV-2 virus than the SARS-CoV-1 virus. It was quite difficult to initially comprehend a lot of the research. It's quite difficult, quite complex, especially protein mechanics. Protein mechanics is looking at the structure of different proteins, and it's attempting to boil down biology on a chemical level, which has which is quite complex, and with that complexity comes with challenges in trying to understand what these papers and data and graphs are telling me. Well, I really enjoyed the area of research that I did. I think that protein mechanics is my favorite area of science. And it's not an area of science that you get to look at school. And so that's one of the amazing things about science extension, that I was able to look at an area of science that I wouldn't have had the chance to otherwise until university to actually investigate and to look at. So it gave me a really great opportunity to be able to dig deep into a topic that I found really interesting, which is wonderful.
I wrote a short story about a housewife in the 1950s and followed the progression of her attitude toward that role. I've always been really interested in the way that women have been treated throughout history, and taken particular interest in the 1950s, as it's very well known for the way that women are being forced into roles as wives and mothers and nothing more. And I did a lot of research about that time period and the effect that that actually had on the mental health of women. And so I really wanted to explore that in my story. Extension to English is a very difficult subject. There's a lot of research involved, a lot of essay writing involved, and it takes a very long time. You have to write like 1 million drafts, which is really painful, but it's worth it in the end, I think. I got to write about something that I wanted to write about, which was fun. You get to have like so much creative exploration in the subject, which is a lot of fun. And I was in a class with a few of my friends, which was a lot of fun as well. But yeah, it was a really good journey, and you get to have a final finished product at the end, which is really satisfying.
So I chose to use skateboard as my main material for my design technology major work, as it's a hobby of mine. I enjoy skateboarding, but I also like the little hidden colours within the skateboards once you cut them up, and I just thought using them would be a great idea, especially when I'm working with recycling materials, as skateboard decks are just simply thrown away into landfills. So by using skateboard, I was just reducing the amount of decks that went into landfills. So I made a collection of things that range from kitchenware and jewellery. So I got 2 knife handles, a bunch of chopping boards, serving boards. I've got bracelets, rings, earrings. What else do I have? Yeah, pretty much just bottle openers, just a range of stuff that can be used for different things. So skateboards aren't flat, they're hard to work with, so I had to press them together, which took a lot of practice and actually figuring out how to do that. So that was probably my main challenge, trying to flatten the decks so I could use them.
So this year, through design technology, I've chosen to do a portable cricket ball machine, which, as I love my cricket, using extension cords can be a bit tricky and time consuming. So I've decided to try and use solar as well to power it instead of using electricity. What happens is I plug the solar into an inverter, which is also charged by a deep cycle battery, and then that eventually charges my bowling machine and hopefully I can use it. But unfortunately it didn't work, so I'll have to try and figure it out after school and yeah, hopefully get it to work. The battery ran out of charge, so I tried to charge and also didn't charge, which was a bit annoying and a bit disappointing as well, but yeah, I'll try and figure it out. Maybe have to get a new battery or yeah. I enjoyed trying something new because I've never used electricity before, so it's a bit it was a new experience. And just getting some advice from my teacher as well. Mr. Robinson was great. Getting him to help me was also great, and yeah, that's it.
Yeah, so spear fishermen use a piece of equipment called a float line, which is a long, usually about 20-metre line, and they find it difficult to wind up and it gets tangled a lot. So I built a mechanism that can evenly and easily wind up a float line tightly on a reel. So there are a lot of challenges that I had to consider making it waterproof. I wasn't allowed to use electronics or metal pieces, and there's a lot of gears involved which are quite difficult to design and make. So I made the gears and the mechanism through designing it on CAD and 3D printing it. I enjoyed learning new skills on CAD and how to 3D print things. I enjoyed problem solving all the problems that came up and finally making a product that works.
So I decided to make a line of children's formal apparel. I thought that making children's clothes would be super cute, and I wanted to make multiple items, so I thought that if I did children's clothes then I could make a different range. Doing children's clothes was really hard because they're so small and fiddly, so I had to be really patient and take the time to do all the little fiddly parts like the pedal panel on my dress and all the embroidery. I enjoyed the design process and playing around with different colours and styles.
I made a 2-piece tutu and leotard inspired by the Arabian dance from the Nutcracker Ballet. I've been dancing for 15 years and I've been doing ballet for that long, so I was really inspired by, doing ballet and I wanted to create a costume for it. Well, I'm a very big perfectionist, so I struggled to make it look like I wanted it to look, so I ended up doing things multiple times and hand sewing them instead of machine sewing them. I liked designing the complete thing at the end and then seeing the end product and choosing the pattern and what style I was going to go with.
So I decided to make a two-piece formal wear / cocktail attire, Dutch-inspired outfit. I was inspired by my Dutch heritage to make something sort of like a contemporary, traditional Dutch outfit, like based off of it. Working with the velvet and the satin were like two really hard fabrics to work with, and trying to make all of the small details like perfect took like a lot of time to finish. I enjoyed designing it, and like seeing the end product was like big relief to see something that I'd made come to life.
I made wearable textiles art that is inspired by traditional Chinese clothing and modern streetwear. I chose it because it was something that I believed was like sort of unique and something that I was like interested in and inspired by, and I thought it was creative, so I went with it. Developing my own pattern for the top was very difficult, especially matching up all the pieces and like making sure the sleeves like worked with the bodice bit. Yeah, I felt that was the most difficult part.
I chose to make a desk, one because I actually needed one, and two, I just thought it would be fun, especially when using similar materials to what I used in my design technology major work, which was skateboard. So I made my design very intricate and very complicated, which was actually very fun. But again, pressing the skateboards was a challenge, and figuring out how to create a timber door that was to go around, so the timber was to bend. But yeah, I figured it out, but it was a challenge, yes. Oh, I just love everything about it, the different the colours within it, the different features, sliding doors, rack doors, railings on the side. It's very different, and I really like it, yeah.
I created a 1920s inspired dress that used recycled doilies to create a piece with my own pattern. I'm very interested in the 1920s culture, and I liked how exciting that was, so using jewellery and really in different patterns kind of showed how excited they were after the war. I loved the whole process. I loved that I was creating my own pattern from the start, and loved learning things on the way, and then it ended out like I wanted to.
For my multimedia major work, I looked at the gastrointestinal tract of the yellowtail scads, and I looked at how microplastic was affecting our waterways. And it was a short film and a documentary on how microplastics affect humans and how it affects the fishes. The most challenging thing was probably the filming of the microplastic, because microplastics are really small, they're less than 5 millimeters, and finding a camera that would zoom enough into the microplastics was difficult. The most enjoyable thing was probably the challenges that went along with it. You know, multimedia is a quite chill subject, but the programming of Adobe softwares was quite difficult to use, and you know, when it failed or when it decided to cut out, those were challenging moments, but it was those challenging moments that made the whole experience overall a really fun time.
I was looking at the whitewashing of the British Admiral Nelson and his portrayal by different historians through the years. I discovered that a lot of the negative information about him had been like deliberately covered up or mishandled to avoid tarnishing a reputation that they were trying to create for him in order to portray him as a hero. I sort of picked it because it was something interesting. I was originally planning to look at Nelson like just as a sort of in the tactics used at Trafalgar, and then how that stands up to modern portrayals. But in researching that, I sort of stumbled onto like, the controversies around his life, and yeah, it was an interesting topic. Researching was quite difficult. A lot of the sources were in sort of oldish English, and just writing it in the end. Researching it was still one of the more enjoyable parts of it, and like finding, you know, two different historical perspectives that offer really contrasting views of Nelson. Those good breakthroughs.